Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Lisa Bottolato with SCIP, and I welcome you to today's webinar, Why Your Coworkers Are Your Most Valuable Source of Competitive Intel. I'm introducing you to Paul Santilli, our CEO of SCIP. Before that, I just wanted to let everyone know that our Q&A session is open for any questions at the webinar as we go through the hour. And if you need to, this is being recorded, so we will have it up and available for you within 48 hours on the SCIP website. And I would like to introduce you to SCIP CEO, Paul Santilli.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Lisa, for the introduction. And I'm super pleased to be here today working with my good friend, Tammy Savage, who I'll introduce in a moment. But this topic here, I think, is going to be front and center on a lot of people's plates because we all work in organizations where I think it's extremely valuable to utilize coworkers on sharing of competitive intel information and insights and things that are related to the industry and marketplace as a whole. So before we get into this, though, I wanted to do a brief overview of the SCIP organization to maybe some of you who may not be familiar with what SCIP is all about. We are the Strategic Consortium of Intelligence Professionals. It's a new moniker name that we've chosen for the acronym SCIP based upon the new expanded direction and the enhanced value proposition that we're doing within the SCIP community. There's 9 major initiatives that we have as part of our value prop. I'm not going to go through all of these. But what's important here is that we have expanded. We keep the competitive intelligence foundation as a fundamental core competency of what SCIP is all about, but we're building on that to include a number of other things related to data-driven decision-making and digital transformation and innovation and so forth. So there's a tremendous amount of value within the SCIP community. We're expanding this value proposition that I stated, but we're also doing this on a global basis. So we're building these intelligence centers of excellence in many other locations, developing more events and workshops. We have an upcoming event in Prague in November that I hope that you can be a part of. But with that, we have a much broader expansion, and I'd highly encourage you to join the SCIP community, either as an associate or as a member, which each have their benefits and advantages associated with that. So with that, let's move on to the topic of the webinar today. I want to introduce my good friend, Tammy Savage, who's the CEO of Groopit. Tammy, do you want to say a few words before we jump in?
Sure. Thanks for having me today, Paul. It's great to see you.
Pleasure. Again. Thank you.
Well, I'm Tammy Savage. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Groopit. I actually spent 23 years at Microsoft leading strategic initiatives there. That's when the seeds of Groopit were planted for me. Because what I found in my work is that the people closest to the customers almost always had the game-changing intelligence. They had the insights that could inform business decisions and just really change our ability to understand what was happening in market and pivot as a company. But getting that intelligence was it's laborious, it's hard. And I actually left Microsoft to start Groopit. So here we are today.
Thank you, Tammy. Excellent background. Super pleased to be partnering with you and developing this consortium-based relationship, as I like to call it. But moving into the webinar conversation that we want to have around the value of the coworker as a whole, this is a concept that I think is front and center on many intelligence individuals' plates. And the reason why I say that is because we all work in organizations that have a large population of coworkers that reside in various functions of the organization that I think has a lot of untapped potential. So, from your perspective, why do you think this coworker peripheral sort of source of intelligence is important to the individual intelligence practitioner themselves?
Well, the number one reason is that it's not commoditized. It's not something that's available to every company, right? All the other intelligence, and there's thousands of sources. It's something that every company can get a hold of. But when you tap into what your employees know, when they're the first to hear the whispers of what's happening, they tend to understand and can figure out how prospects and customers are reacting to competitors and see first what those competitors are doing, they have very unique, valuable insights. And I think you know this from the 2023 competitive state of competitive intelligence report. It's the #1 source of intel. It's the type of intel that employees value the most. In fact, I'll just share this stat: 63% think it is extremely valuable and 29% valuable. That's super high numbers for a source. It's the #1 source.
You know, when you hit the stats like that, over 80% see it's valuable or higher than valuable is a tremendous number. And that, I think, is an area that's, you know, we as intelligence professionals maybe haven't exploited enough, haven't taken advantage enough. So, you know, with that, as you're the peripheral coworkers within your organization, they come from a lot of different disciplines, right? There's going to be people in many different functions. So where do you find to have those individuals that have the best source of this intelligence information that you can tap into?
Well, it's surprisingly a really inclusive answer. I mean, it's all your customer facing employees, right? Anybody that's in the field, sales, solutions engineers, customer success, support. It's also people on the product side that are doing customer councils and getting product feedback, or on the design team. It also includes marketing people. You know, our marketing teams, they're out there networking, they're meeting competitors. Right. It's really something that if you can harness everybody to share competitive intelligence, you can really tap into a gold mine.
Well, you know what, you bring up a very good point, because in my history of mine working at organizations, what the intelligence function has usually been relegated to a small organization that has developed insights from using primary, secondary research and working with maybe a third party and developing a package. And then we disseminate that out into our internal customers, so to speak. And what happens a lot of times is these other organizations, like you're saying, these customer facing groups will look at it and say, that's not what we see. You know, we're seeing a lot of different stuff. So including those people into your pool of resources to generate this content, I think, is key to make sure that you have a comprehensive list, rather than tossing a substance over the fence and then waiting for it to be tossed back over and saying yay, nay, or whatever. So with that in mind, you know, what are some of the characteristics of those individuals as a part of the coworker environment that you are looking for in terms of being valuable members that can provide that sort of intelligence that's suitable?
Yeah, you know, just let me comment on one thing you bring up, because I think competitive intelligence professionals, they know that this is valuable intel, but it's hard to historically, it's been super hard to get. I think that's why it's been relegated, not because they think it's not useful. It's just been hard to get. And we're going to talk about how to change that. But understanding the characteristics of what gets you to high quality competitive intel, I think that's what you're asking. And I would say there's 3 things, in my opinion. The first is that the data comes in real time. So that the rep doesn't go and have a conversation and then is asked in a survey or in a meeting, you know, 3 weeks later, what have you heard? You forget. I mean, I go to a doctor's appointment and forgot what happened, you know, 3 weeks ago. People don't remember unless it's absolutely essential to their world. So it has to be real time, where you're letting people share the moment they hear competitive intel. The second thing is, it has to be data oriented, not long narrative where they have to send an email and figure out who to send it to, but just quick data. And it has to be quantitative. So unless you have those 3 things, it's really hard to get, to share, to get, and to process.
Absolutely. You know, your point about the real-time effect, that's something I definitely stress upon, because the way the world is today with big data and the advent of fourth industrial revolution and so forth, the speed of data and the speed of intelligence is just nonstop. And if you're taking time to do batch processing and taking time to then disseminate that information, you're so far behind the curve, you're so far out of date, it's not even funny, right? You know,
You're
so this
so
is the
right.
sort of stuff. Yeah, it's the stuff that you really got to use these readily available sources of folks in your organization, gather and disseminate and execute upon this data as fast to real time as possible. So with that in mind, let's do the alternative question here. What's the pitfalls if you don't have this in place? You know, what are some of the shortcomings of not having these sources of intelligence?
Well, look, I'll give you all the standard answers, which is you're going to lose business and the deal cycles are going to be longer, and you're going to have lower win rates. But and all that's true. But let me tell you what's really happening in the field. When your competitor is gathering data in real time about what you're doing, they have intelligence that probably you don't even have. So I'll leave names out, but I'll tell you what one big corporation is doing, gathering competitive intelligence in real time. Every time they see your company in one of their accounts, if that account is piloting your software, if they're responding to an RFP, that rep in real time is saying this competitor is in our account, so they can outsmart you. If you're not doing that to them and being really specific about what's happening so that the corporate resources can act and stay ahead of that competitor, you're going to be behind. Now, it doesn't show up in the numbers immediately, but it shows up in the numbers in a very big way. So the impact is real to the bottom line. I guess, let me give you this mental model of what is ideal. Have you used Waze, the traffic app?
No.
Okay, so I'll tell you what it is. Basically, if you are a driver and you use Waze, the moment you see a traffic accident or a speed trap, you get out your phone and a few quick taps, you're sharing data about that. You're sharing that there's a traffic accident here.
Yeah.
And everybody can see that there's a traffic accident in real time. There's no batch processing, so that and then everybody can use it to adjust their driving routes. That's basically what you want to do with competitive intelligence. The moment that a company sees a competitor in their account, they share that data so that everybody knows what's happening and can be on the fact that they need to figure out how to win. So that real-time sharing of events and real-time accessibility is the thing that can create competitive advantage and really change the game.
Tammy, that concept of you're using the waves analogy within the traffic scenario. We in the data business would call this swarm learning, and basically where you have, today they're using artificial intelligence to do this swarm learning on masses of different components, whether they might be, but it's essentially the sharing of content from one individual to the masses instantaneously, as close to instantaneously as possible. So that ability to do that is conceptually great, right? I mean, that's the utopian environment that we're all trying to reach. But in the real world, of course, we have a lot of challenges in trying to get this sort of content from our coworkers. What do you think are some of the limitations or some of the resistance that's involved in getting this information from this coworker community, as we're suggesting?
Yeah, well, that intel that they have, it's everywhere and nowhere, right? It's stuck in surveys and spreadsheets, and it evaporates in conversation, and it gets lost in CRM notes. So it's kind of ad hoc data chaos, and it makes it completely inaccessible. It's why competitive intelligence professionals end up piecing together all these little fragments of information to create a 360-degree view. And that is manual, hard, laborious work. If I had to do it that way, I'd say, I don't really want competitive intelligence from the field, because that is a mess.
Effort. Yeah, you'd miss the whole instantaneous effort too, right? The whole real-time effort by trying to do it that way.
That's right. It's impossible. And it's completely impossible to do at scale. So that those are the big challenges, is losing that and piecing it together and then getting it in a way that can actually be used in real time. So hard. I think that's why why a lot of competitive intelligence professionals have given up, is because they haven't seen an alternative way to do that.
Well, that is the $1 million question. Then, what are some of the tidbits of secrets, or what are some of the ways that we can be better in doing this? I mean, because sometimes you have coworkers that are super supportive. Other ones say, hey, look, get out of my face, and then there's everything in between, right?
Right.
And we're not just talking customer facing, we're talking also people in the product development and the R&D space, manufacturing, all these other organizations. So in order to really get this information and use it instantaneously, what are some of the best practices that you've experienced and that you can share with the organization here?
Yeah, first of all, you really have to think about it differently. And Groopit provides some functionality that helps you implement best practices, but I'll share some of those best practices for you. The first one is, you want to define exactly what competitive intelligence you want people to share, and do that in a way that is data oriented. So really create a data model. For example, if you want pricing intelligence, define exactly what that means. And it's usually, we'll help you do a quantitative definition of that, but you want to know who the competitor is, what product they're pricing, what the price is, obviously, how it compares to yours. There's some data that you can extract that makes it easy for the employee to share, but also makes it easy for you to process. When you start with a data model where the competitive intelligence you want to gather is defined well and precisely, you can completely change the fidelity of the data that you get. I compare it a little bit to, remember old school photography where we had to take film in to be processed at the photo
Yes,
mat?
I do. I remember that very well, unfortunately, yes.
Yeah. And now we're, everybody's taking pictures all of the time, and the quality of the photos are so much better. We've moved photography from this old-fashioned kind of lower fidelity, slow mode to something that is crystal clear and lots of it, and you get great fidelity, visibility into what's happening. That's what a data model does for gathering field intelligence. We move from the slow, antiquated, low visibility to instantaneous, high visibility through that field intelligence. And I think it all comes down to establishing a data model that can then be plugged into all of your systems.
Well, your point, I think, about defining the objective up front is critical, because too many times I've seen organizations just look how collect data for the sake of collecting data and then trying to figure out how to use the data without really having an objective in mind. So that point you make, I think, is spot on. As we define the scoping and define the data modeling requirements up front, how do we really take this data and transition it from being more qualitative to quantitative in value and actionable for that matter?
Well, once you decide the data, you can take each of those, almost think of them as fields, and turn them into quant data. So when it's qualitative, we use a trick called that's a 4-point scale. So for example, in your pricing definition, you can create a 4-point scale that compares that price to your company. Is it worse? Is it equivalent? Is it better? Or is it significantly better than your pricing? What a 4-point scale does is it pushes people above or below the middle line. It doesn't give them this neutral middle ground to choose. And what you're doing with that 4-point scale is you're turning qualitative data into something that's quant and can be analyzed. So at the end of the day, you want your pricing people to know that this pricing issue has come up 138 times, and 60% of the time it's the competitor's pricing is better or significantly better than ours. And you also want to know that 92% of the time that means that business is lost or likely lost. That's quant data that you can build a business case around, and the corporate people can use to inform their decisions. So when you do the data modeling part, the strategy on the front end, you need to take each of the pieces of qualitative data that you look at and use tricks like the 4-point scale to turn it into quant data that then can be processed and used to make decisions.
So 4-point scale is acting as that, translator, so to speak, of from qual to quant type data, which makes it more the ability to measure it better, give it a scale, give it a relative ranking, so to speak, to make it actionable. When you're considering all of the multiple sources that you're getting this from and the amount of data, I mean, this is a pretty big undertaking, isn't it? I mean, how big is this really for an organization to manage?
Well, the trick here is to make it as simple as possible, to basically put in an engine, right? So, and make those employees actually be the fuel that runs the engine and automate the whole thing. That's really the goal. So I think when we initially talk about this with CI professionals, they see a massive amount of work where in fact, it's actually the opposite. You use a data model and you put in the right incentives and prompts and give people value back, and you can turn employees into really part of the engine, the fuel of it.
No, I think that's the key element there in terms of getting them engaged as being an ongoing scalable source of content that could automatically be inputted into your tool, such that then it becomes a production sort of generation of content and actionable insights. I think that's the real trick there.
It is, and there's best practices that we all know and leverage whenever we can about finding those champions that are going to model the behavior, and all of those things matter. And but what you really want as a competitive intelligence professional is you want the technology to do the heavy lifting for you. Right. So that so that's the technology that's changing the behavior. So a perfect example that we use is keyword prompts. So whenever a competitor comes up in a discussion on Slack or Teams, on any channel, not a competitive intelligence channel, we'll prompt the employees to say, hey, you mentioned a competitor. Do you have competitive intelligence to share? Those are the things that you can do to leverage technology to create that engine and take the burden off of the team that's running competitive intelligence. So we're constantly looking for ways to automate that so that it's the system that's doing the just-in-time coaching.
Oh, so what are some of the things you've experienced in your history around some of the pitfalls that organizations try to do this behavior, but they fall short in some way, shape, or form? I mean, what are some of the areas that you think organizations have a real challenge? Some hurdles, maybe they could be culturally, they could be physically, they could be resource based. I mean, what are some of the perspectives you might see from that?
Yeah, well, first of all, what you don't want to do is switch people to a new system. That is the biggest mistake people make. If they're used to working in Teams or Slack or Salesforce or email, you want them to keep working in those systems and just add the data model to those. The biggest mistake that companies will make is when they try to get people to go to a new destination all of the time to do competitive intelligence.
That new learning platform that they got to use, right? Nobody wants to do that.
So I'm not saying it. You want people to be able to share competitive intelligence in all of those places and maybe consume in the destination. Battle cards, for example, are a great resource for people. But in order to get your employees sharing competitive intelligence, you need to make that happen where they work. I think that is one of the biggest mistakes people make, is not thinking that through. The second is, if you when companies expect a rep to sit down and write information, it's just too laborious. They have to think about what to write. They have to think about who to send it to. They have to, it's just too much of a heavy lift cognitively to figure all of that out. So you want to simplify so much and provide so much clarity and direction that they know exactly what's valuable to the company and exactly what you're looking for, so they can just provide the intel.
Clear indication of how they can contribute. And if you make it very simple and easy for them, then they're much more willing to participate and engage with you, of course, right?
That's right. It's a classic leadership principle. If you want people to do something, you have to over communicate what you want them to do, what is important. I'll just add one more thing. This is the opposite. What I've seen works so well by companies when they do the integration, when they make it really simple to do. They have to spend time really educating employees about why their competitive intelligence is so important to the company. And I think the more you can educate people on that and help them see the impact of what they share, which can be super easy, it means a lot to employees. Employees want to do things that make a difference. So it's connecting those dots that really make the difference between a great program and, a so-so program.
Well, it's a huge point, because if people are contributing, they want to make sure that they feel valued in what they're contributing towards, right? If that, if they're giving you information, it's sort of like when you do a survey, and we used to do all kinds of customer surveys back in the days, and we still do, because that customer feedback is so critical. But if customers don't feel that you're using their feedback, then they're not going to want to participate anymore. And that's the same sort of concept you're suggesting from a coworker standpoint, right?
That's absolutely right.
Yeah. Hey, we got some questions here I wanted to get through. I want to make sure we have enough time to cover them. We have Kathy Hayes, who's contributed first question. How do you motivate people to take the time to contribute the info when everyone has so many competing demands? Well, simply, Kathy, you just tell them to stop everything else they're doing and only focus on our needs, right? Tammy, I'm sure you would agree with that. No, of course. Tammy, go ahead. Please give some insight on that.
Well, there's two things. The first is on the time point. You want to get the time down to less than a minute that it takes to them to share. So you flip that equation. So the time it takes to share is super low. And then you want to do what we just said, Paul. You explain to them why, and then show them the results. I'll tell you what is the fuel is when employees see that their intel is actually informing or making a difference in company decisions. And, that pricing gets updated based on intel that you're collectively sharing. There is no bigger motivator.
It's point to drunk. Yeah, it's you become glued to that, then you want to participate. Yeah.
Right. I mean, when that pricing changes based on the collective intelligence, and I can win another deal that year, there's nothing more important to me as a sales rep or as a customer success person. If I can, eliminate an entire set of calls or make something very easy for my customer, that is a win.
Absolutely. Yep. Hey, so another question from Kathy is, and you mentioned this briefly in a prior during the conversation here, is really, bringing battle cards into this whole thing. How does this fit in with battle cards, the generation, the content? Because battle cards contain a lot of this competitive information that you want to share. So how do we play a part of that as from an asset development standpoint?
Well, absolutely. So when you use a data model and you're capturing the field intel by competitor, you can push that data right into battle cards. So you can push the raw data feed of insights, and competitive intelligence professionals can create summary insights from the collective intelligence that also can be published through battle cards. So it adds a level of, think of it as another but very important source of data that feeds the battle cards.
Well, in my experience, we've used this kind of content for not only battle cards, but for a number of different assets, you know, FAQs, or even attack campaigns, marketing attack campaigns, and digital marketing account type information, where we would use this intelligence specific to maybe the environment, a geography, or maybe a business type, or a vertical market aspect. So your point about incorporating this valued intelligence, keeping it simple, keeping it real time, using these 4-point plan that you articulated, and getting that out such that then you can disseminate it through all different kinds of assets. I think that's a great approach to doing this. So another question from Kathy, and Kathy definitely gets the gold star of the day for the number of excellent questions she's submitting here. So thank you, Kathy, very much for doing that. Do you have any examples or case studies on what this could look like? Anything that you could share, you know, again, as a best practice, maybe in a general sense, of course, not a lot of the details, and keep it anonymous, of course, but, you know, what are some of the things that you could share from a case study standpoint?
We absolutely do. And there's case studies on our website. But I think the key phrase that Kathy said here is what it looks like. I think the light bulb goes off for people when they actually see it. So we're happy to walk anybody through what it looks like to do something like this through a system like Groopit, and how we take that Waze approach and bring it to competitive intelligence. But if you're a reader, there's case studies on our website that you can grab and look at.
And to that point, you know, just as a general thing, and I kind of mentioned this at the beginning of the call, but SCIP has a ton of resources we can also share, and would love to partner with Groopit on sharing Groopit's experiences within the SCIP community, as well as part of our consortium building, you know, as I keep talking about. So I think to Tammy's point, Kathy, I think the point is that, you know, there's a ton of content that we can certainly educate and highlight the features around this sort of approach that Groopit and Tammy is offering here. So I think there's a lot of benefit to the respondent community here on this sort of topic. So anyone else have questions, please submit them. Tammy, I think for the content of what you're suggesting here as part of this expanded sourcing of intelligence information is absolutely critical to any sort of intelligence modeling. You know, the utilization of coworkers, and they're right there within your community, and being part of the same organization, you'd like to ideally think that, you know, we're all on the same team, we should all work together. You know, it's all about utopian environment, and let's all, you know, virtual group hug on the phone all the time, and we're all going to help each other, right? But of course, that isn't the case many times. You have these challenges, you have sometimes there's, and I'm being somewhat of a realist here, and I apologize in advance, but there's a lot of ulterior objectives that organizations might have. Maybe this is key information you don't want to share. How do you get beyond anything like that? I mean, how do you get beyond the sort of, you know, this is my information, I don't want to share it. You know, how do you open this up? And you talked about the advantages of showing them the benefits, but is there anything else that you can kind of get, and you can suggest, so that these people kind of open up their arms a little bit more and let the information come out?
Well, I think there are times where you want to keep sensitive data to yourself.
Yeah.
And that's okay. We acknowledge that. And in the data model you create, you should be able to define the data that should remain hidden. So I think so you have to be able to do both. And I think the art in it is to define a data model that allows real visibility and transparency. So people in the organization are not just sharing, but they can immediately get the benefit of their colleagues' insights. And then at the same time, have the ability to lock down data that should remain sensitive or hidden. So that's the level of sophistication that you want to really take to thinking through the data model, so that you can do both.
Excellent answer. Thank you very much for summarizing that. We have another question here from Rajaprasana Venkatasan, if I pronounce that correctly. How do we validate the inputs provided by coworkers? That's an excellent point, because it could be an opinion versus, fact-based or experience-based, but, how do we validate this sort of input to make sure that it's going to be valuable to the intelligence model that we're trying to put together?
Well, there's two parts to that. One is you're doing it because you're crowdsourcing data. So,
Right.
It's the principles of crowdsourcing that you see, you can quickly see what the anomalies are versus what the patterns are. And what's really important is to understand the perception. So if something that a competitor claims might not be valid, but if it comes up 100 times, you want to know that that's what that competitor is saying. And then you want to do one-to-many education to your employees about that perception. So using the power of the crowd really helps you validate and distill the trends, the things that are really happening or perceptions that are really happening versus the anomalies that you probably want to ignore.
The phrase "the power of the crowd." I love that, because especially in today's world, and I talk a lot about this topic, the dark web sort of content out there, the fictitious sort of things that are happening within AI, and you always, I mean, there's a number of situations where you have organizations that will purposely broadcast out fake content to deride their competitors' programs and so forth. So there's that element of what we would call, in the space that I'm familiar with, we always do triangulation. The power of the crowd, triangulate the data. Don't rely necessarily on making big business decisions on one source or one piece of data. And I think the model you're painting here with multiple, individuals, multiple organizations in this co-worker model, I think is a very good way to try to minimize that. Nothing's going to be 100% foolproof, but I think what you're suggesting is certainly a way to keep it as much as, as clean as possible.
Absolutely.
So we have another question here from Earl Henthorn. Prior to starting this collection effort, is it a good idea to poll the sales force across the organization for volunteers? The idea being to identify sellers who have a curiosity or a predisposition to collecting and sharing the competitor information. Hopefully this would be a way to get quick wins and create a quicker feedback loop. Great question, Earl. Thank you. Any comments on that, Tammy?
Well, Earl is exactly right. You're exactly right. So here's what I would add to that. Choose a few sales people that can help you construct the data model. Now, we'll do workshops where a competitive intelligence professional can bring in their key stakeholders and collaborate on creating that data model so that it really benefits different organizations and it's designed up front with them in mind. And that's a really great place to start getting their buy-in and then expand to a group of more sellers, just like Earl described, to get them sharing competitive intel, refining that data model before you go out to a bigger group. It's a great way to get a quick win.
This is a really good point. And in my experience, we had a B2B business relationship. So we would use a lot of our business partners in the field, so to speak, who might have information around competitive content. I would imagine, Tammy, that's probably another source of, maybe even customer or business partner that you can pull from.
Indeed, it's a really important source. And you just choose the ones you want to start with and keep growing.
Excellent. Yeah, great stuff. Great content. Thank you, Earl, for sharing that. So the whole concept here of pulling together this information, third party, possibly from partners, from customers, coworkers in different disciplines, you having the tool set to modify or to translate the qualitative into the quantitative, keeping this real time, using tool sets in order to have an execution aspect. Man, you've made it super easy then to be ahead of all your competitors, right, Tammy? I mean, this is a no-brainer now. It should be super easy.
It's not the old world where this is hard and complicated and slow. It just has to be simple and fast and get results, wins.
This is great. Well, this has been a extremely informative discussion. I'm super pleased that we have you, Tammy, on this call, and I feel privileged to engage with you and share this, share the knowledge with you on all of this, which is great. If we don't have any other open questions, I'm going to leave it open here for maybe another 20 seconds or so. Tammy, are there any closing comments you'd like to make and to this topic and about the Groopit value prop and the partnership with SCIP and so forth that we can close with?
Well, the one thing that I'd love people to remember is that this work of getting intel from employees, it can be so easy and done so fast. And you just have to take a different approach.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you so much, Tammy. It's been an honor and a privilege to have you as part of the SCIP consortium via this webinar. And I definitely look forward to working closer with you and with the Groopit community going forward. And I want to thank all of the folks who attended the webinar itself, the respondents here. Feel free to reach out to me or Tammy, and you can connect with us on LinkedIn. I'm sure Tammy would feel the same as I am about sharing of content and answering questions. And again, I want to thank everybody. Do we have any more chat content coming in here? I don't think we do. No, we don't. Okay, very good. I'm going to close it up then. I'll leave it back to you, Lisa. Thank you so much, Tammy. And again, thank you for the partners and the respondents on the call.
Thank you, Paul.